Welcome back to another episode of Engineering Culture, live in Studio Z, or at least we're recording live. Today, I'm joined by an old colleague of mine, Rajeev Rajan, who worked together with me at Facebook, but has an awesome new role now. I'm going to let him introduce himself and give us a little bit of his background. Hi, Rajeev.
Hi, Josh. Nice to meet you again.
Yeah, awesome. So tell us, what do you do? What are you up to now, and how did you get there?
Yeah, so I'm the CTO of Atlassian, and what that means is that all of engineering in Atlassian, including product, platform, IT, trust, security, rolls up to me. So that's a pretty big responsibility, but really exciting. I'm an engineer at heart, and I always love working with engineering teams, and so that's great. And then before that, I've only ever worked at 3 companies actually. Atlassian. Before that, it was Facebook, and then before that, Microsoft. And the saying at Microsoft was that version 3, V3, is always the best version, and so I hope I'm the best version of myself at this point.
That's awesome. I'm sure it's true. I'm sure it's true. I am particularly excited about this episode because Zooplo is a remote company. We have folks in Germany, in Spain, San Francisco, Charlotte. So very interested in remote engineering culture, how to building an amazing remote engineering culture. And I struggle to think of a company that is dealing with remote more than Atlassian is. So the CTO is based here in the Seattle area, right? I think the Bellevue
and our
office.
CFO as well.
And the CFO as well.
Yep.
But the headquarters are in Australia, is that right?
Well, actually, that's a misconception of Atlassian. It is a company that started in Australia, and our 2 co-founders and CEOs are based in Australia, but we're actually a US-based company at this point.
So technically based here, but your CEO is in Australia.
That's right.
You still have this enormous time zone gap to deal with. Yep. Well, I'd love to spend a bit of time getting into that. We've had several conversations with former colleagues of ours, Josh Williams, VJ. Last one was actually with a guy from GitHub Copilot. I am really curious about engineering culture, and that's one of the things we've been talking about. So what's the headliner? Tell us about Atlassian's culture, and in particular, how does it compare to Facebook or Meta and Microsoft?
Look, this is a great question. I am both a student of engineering as well as a student of culture, because I think great engineering, world-class engineering as I call it, comes from amazing culture. And one of the things that attracted me to Atlassian was the culture at Atlassian. It's driven by the values. Atlassian is a very values-driven company. We have values like don't f*** the customer and open company, no. Those were some of the values that spoke to me.
Some strong language in those values.
Yes, absolutely.
Love it.
A little Australian, but it's great. I mean, I think, it's something that we live and breathe every day, and it drives our culture as a company. And, when you talk about culture, there's macro culture and micro culture. So the macro culture is more driven by the values of the company. And so when we say don't f*** customer, we mean it. And anything that we do, from responding to SEVs to how we build features, is driven by making sure we put customer first. And so that's something that's part of the macro culture of the company. Microculture are the small things that happen every day. These are the things that are not on posters on a wall, but it's like what you live and breathe in meetings and things that you do every day. And let me give you a few examples of microculture at Atlassian that I think is interesting. One is we write things down. So we have Confluence as one of our products.
Of course,
something that we use a lot. And every meeting that we do, anything that we do is written down. And I think there's something to be said about writing things down in whole sentences and paragraphs, and really it forces you to think carefully about what is it that you're trying to do. And so that's a big part of our microculture. Also, the other part of it is first principles thinking. So anytime we think about something, we try to break it down to the first principles of why would we do this? What is the rationale for it? It causes us many times to think differently. So one of the things I love about Atlassian culture is, especially because it started in Australia outside the Silicon Valley bubble, the founders have done a great job of thinking differently at key moments in the company's history. And I think that comes from our first principles thinking as well. So that's an example of microculture. Now, with respect to your questions on Facebook and Microsoft, I mean, amazing places. I've had great experiences, and both companies have had many eras too. Like in a period of time, you have Microsoft in the 90s. I was there as an engineer, IC engineer, writing code. It was the most amazing place to be on earth. We shipped products that were changing the world. And that was a great, wonderful time. But then Microsoft went through different eras again, ups and downs and so on, and doing really well right now. As someone who worked at Microsoft for a long time, I'm really excited to see the company do well. But its culture is, I would say, a lot more sort of from the technical roots. It's kind of driven by the 2 founders. There's a lot of very strong technical foundation coming from Gates and leaders, that he groomed. And then from Ballmer and company, there's a very strong business culture. So if you look at Microsoft's enterprise strength or sales strength or their ability to make revenue across different markets, really strong. So that's something that is about Microsoft culture.
Yeah.
Facebook is just an engineer's paradise. I mean, like people like Vijay and others. It's just Jay Parikh, who's somebody I look up to a lot, and they've really built a strong culture for engineers to be amazing, world class, whether it be the tools or the build systems or building products. Amazing things over there. And that's one of the things I'm trying to emulate in Atlassian. One of my goals with Atlassian is to take Atlassian towards world-class engineering. It's an amazing place, great engineers. One of the things about Atlassian that's interesting is it built Jira for software engineers. So it's iconically the company built for software engineers. So anything we do in engineering is highly leveraged because it can help all engineers across the world. And that's one of the things about the Atlassian culture that drew me here.
Yeah, that's one of the fun things about working on developer tools, right? It's kind of like self-serving, you get to build for yourself.
You're in the business of developer tools and engineering.
Drilling in on the remote thing a little bit.
Yes.
I mean, we find it, I think we're doing great, but we find it hard just having Europe and the West Coast of America as time zones. So and we're nowhere near the scale of Atlassian, we're 10 people. What are the tools and techniques at your disposal to make culture, engineering, rhythm work across, literally glally? How do you do it?
Look, first of all, let's just acknowledge that nobody has the right answers on this. We've just gone through COVID and something the world has never experienced before. And I think we are all kind of struggling to find the right answer here. Atlassian has taken the position of what we call Team Anywhere. So we strongly believe that the world has changed and that we believe in distributed teams, we believe in remote teams, and we basically believe in talent available all across the planet and people working from wherever they choose to work from.
Okay.
And so that's something we have leaned into heavily. At the same time, it doesn't mean we don't have offices. We have offices all over the world: Sydney, the Bay Area, Austin. We're starting one in Seattle. And so we believe the office is a place where you can come in to do what we call intentional togetherness. So what we believe is it's not like you just work remotely and you never meet people. You need human connection. You need to work together. And the offices are a place where you can build that connection, and we call that intentional togetherness. Where you can come in, you can do offsites, onsite, you can do team events, you can do brainstorming together, and then you of course go back to your homes or locations or wherever you are and continue to work on Zoom or remotely as well. So that's kind of our philosophy.
Yeah.
And we believe it gives flexibility to people. So we're one of the few big companies that are not saying, hey, come back in 3 days a week and we'll make sure that you're coming in so many times and so on. We don't believe in sort of bean counting and tracking our folks.
Yeah.
We want flexibility for people to work sometimes in the office, sometimes at home, whatever makes sense for them.
Yeah.
And so that's the space we are in. But again, everyone's experimenting and we're all learning and trying to figure things out. In terms of what we have done with our tools and such, we have leaned heavily into developer productivity for engineering.
Okay.
And one of the tools we build is called Compass. So what is Compass? Compass is a tool that you can go to figure out where are all your microservices, where are all your repos, where are all the different components. For each component, what is the documentation? Is there a wiki for it? Who's on call, etc. So no matter where you live in the world, you can always go to Compass to figure out, I'm working with this component. How do I use the APIs? You don't need to wait for an engineer to wake up in a different time zone.
Yeah.
You can self-serve and empower yourself to get going. One of the stories I have is as an engineer, early days of Microsoft, 2 a.m. in the morning, I'm sitting writing code. I was working on the Windows NT source code, one of the most amazing code bases, by the way. And I was so empowered. I could set a breakpoint anywhere in the operating system. I could debug anything.
Yeah.
I could build the whole OS on my dev box, and I didn't need to wait for someone to talk to someone. I could get going and write code. And we talk of that in terms of developer joy. It's that loop of you're writing code and you don't have friction and you don't have to stop and ask somebody a question. So that's kind of what we're trying to do in Atlassian, is to make our tools, developer tools, things like Compass, everything that we use with Confluence, documented, as I said, the microculture of writing things down, so that as an engineer, you are not blocked no matter which part of the earth you're in. So that's one part of it.
Love it.
The other part of it is we have divided the earth into a few what we call halos or collaboration zones. And we try to make sure that any team like the Jira team or the Confluence team or any particular product team for a size of say 150 engineers is only across 2 time zones, and we call that a single collaboration zone. So for example, West Coast, US and Sydney, or Sydney and India.
Close-ish together.
Close enough together, so you have at least 4 to 6 hours of overlap, and you can reasonably work together across that. And we call that a collaboration zone. And we actually make sure that our teams are healthy from a collaboration zone standpoint.
Interesting. Okay, there's a lot in there. You even opened up some other things I'd love to pick up on. Just randomly now. You mentioned friction and like removing friction. That is the thing we obsess about. Like if we can one of the biggest things I learned at Facebook actually was the power of removing friction from a process and how that transforms the experience.
Exactly.
Thing we think about a lot here. So interesting. You have these collaboration zones. You do try and keep people somewhat overlapped on time. You think some amount of face time is important. Do you have like a cadence for that? Like how often do you want to get people together? Like, is there a kind of a rule of thumb?
Yeah, we do. We basically tell teams of any size, imagine a team of 10 engineers and your engineering manager and PM and designer and so on, all the way to like bigger teams of 150 in size. 150, I use that number because that's Dunbar's number. That's kind of like the number beyond that. It's no longer a team. It gets to be a bigger organization. Right? And so that at that sort of scale, we ask teams to get together once a quarter. Right?
Okay.
Simple thing. It's like once a quarter, do an offsite, get into an office or get into a offsite location.
Yeah.
And when you do the offsite, we actually tell people like spend more time getting to know each other. It doesn't have to be like an all work offsite, get into a bunch of topics. Yeah, do some of the work obviously, but like go out for dinner, do a fun activity, get to know your coworkers. And so that connection that you build, that human connection that you build in that, we call it an ITG or intentional togetherness event, really helps you when you go back into your Zoom meeting or you go back to your different locations. It helps you to kind of like work together really well.
Wow, this is awesome. So it's clearly, it shouldn't be a surprise from a company sort of the size and success of Atlassian. It's clearly very intentional. The fact you have all these names like ITG, togetherness meetings and so on.
And the other big part I should say is we are the biggest dog fooders of our own products. So whether it's Jira or Confluence or Atlas or Compass, we have a whole host of products. Our products are fundamentally built for remote distributed work. That is the future we believe of the world. Whether it's small companies like yours or bigger companies, I think that's where things are headed. Notwithstanding the fact that we are all trying different things. Even in companies that are, by the way, asking people to come in, they are still a big proportion of the work is remote distributed. And so we think our tools and what we build for the world is important for the future of work, and we live it every day.
Awesome. So Facebook was famous for the posters. That's how this whole series got started, actually. Josh and I were working on the play. I think you saw the play. Did you see it?
Right. Both of you
keeps coming up. And we were chatting. We just started chatting about posters, and the idea of doing the video came together. So, what are some of the hacks or tricks, or I think Josh famously called it propaganda. What are the tricks you use to sort of disseminate culture in Atlassian?
Our values are not on posters necessarily, and in the way that sometimes it's done, but it's really ingrained into everything that we do. Like, there's not a meeting that I'm in where somebody doesn't use one of our values. It's a sort of part of the language. It's like if somebody's trying to make a pretty direct point, they'll be like, OCNB, I think X. And OCNB is open company, no.
Okay.
So when you use the word OCNB in a sentence, it's like a trigger to say, hey, I'm going to use a company value that says, I'm going to be pretty blunt over here about what I think.
Nice.
And it encourages this microculture of like speaking up and saying the thing versus like dancing around the thing. And I think that helps us effectively get to the right solution faster. Because in many cultures, like if people are not being direct, it just takes a long time to debug and figure out what's going on. Right?
I love that they've become like acronyms, like OCNB, which is like a little bit like inside baseball. You're inside the club now.
Exactly.
Welcome. Right. You're part of the lingo, and that gets
and likewise if there's a SEV and you're talking about what to do, like the customer will come up like in those conversations, and you find people basically taking actions in line with the values. And so those are some hacks. We also use it in our performance management system. And it's not like we go through a checklist of, did you do this value, that value? It's more like we focus on both the what and the how. So lots of times in performance systems, it's like, okay, what did you deliver? What impact did you land? You also want to be cognizant of how did you do that? For example, one of our values is play as a team. So we really do emphasize, and this is an important Atlassian cultural thing and value is, are you bringing people along? We have, one of our cultural things is people in Atlassian are really nice. Like we value nice people. We believe actually nice people can win and do great things. And you don't have to have, lots of times people are like, to be having ambitious goals and to win that, you need to have sharp, edges and shoulders. And like we believe that you can be nice to each other, collaborate, and still do great, amazing things, you know.
Okay, I definitely. So this was not a topic I planned to get into, but I'm really curious about this because it's something I personally value a lot.
Right.
In terms of the culture I want to work in and the culture we want to create at Zooplo, where, you know, if I meant like my early days, I was also at Microsoft. We didn't overlap, we didn't work together, I don't think. But it was kind of cutthroat before Satya changed the culture there, you know, and I would say a lot of jerks, I would say, did very well. And it was fine to be a jerk. In fact, it was
the smart jerks, like
it was like healthy. It was like a good career move to be a jerk, and I never liked it. Wasn't my thing. I think Facebook was quite the opposite. Actually, very few jerks I know were successful. Probably some, but no, it was raw. I mean, it was raw. It was really like a culture where peer feedback was valued, and you know, you had to sort of be very collaborative and bring your XFN along. Let's talk a little bit about that. How do you make that work? Especially in a large organization, because you know, once an organization scales and it stops growing quite as quickly, that's when I tend to find like the elbows come out and competing for resource becomes quite political. How do you keep that sort of like nice, supportive, collaborative, psychologically safe place to work at the scale of Atlassian?
Yeah, it's something that it's hard to graft on later. I mean, I think you and I, you know, we both went to Microsoft, and as an engineer growing up, I do remember the culture being very, you know, we used to call it red in some ways because consequences of failure were high. Therefore, if you broke the build or, you know, you checked in a bug fix or something, those had repercussions, and the way it was dealt with was not the best. And, you know, it led to a pretty intense culture. And so, you know, you're right, like Facebook corrected for some of those things. And actually, in recent times, Satya has gone and corrected for some of those things in terms of, you know, not tolerating smart jerks and things like that. Because I think, you know, there's a lot of collateral damage to the organization, to people, to having such behaviors, you know, exist. And overall in tech, I think we are moving towards a better kind of situation, right? But to answer your question, look, it has to come from the beginning. It has to come from the founders. So both the founders firmly believe in playing nice and you know, collaboration and playing as a team. And in fact, our stock ticker for Atlassian is team. Like, you know, what we sell. Yes,
I didn't know that. That's cool. Okay.
Our whole mission is about unleashing, you know, the potential of teams. And so that has been part of the DNA of the company right from the beginning. And it's something that attracted me to Atlassian, by the way, and also something that I have believed in through my career as well. And so, you know, I need to model it, leaders need to model it. It needs to be part of your culture, both macro as well as micro, and something that you live every day. And so, you know, you call out behaviors that are not good. Like, and one of the best ways that this works is when you hire somebody into Atlassian, and if they are like a smart jerk or they have sharp elbows, they get rejected. Like the organism, it's organ rejection, and you know, they don't do well. And so that's one way that, you know, you make sure that the culture is strong with that regard.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think it is a little debatable whether tech is still shifting that way or whether there's a little bit of a bounce back happening. You see in certain circles, Elon, I admire him greatly as an engineer for what he's achieved, but certainly from what I just listened, I don't know if you've listened to his audiobook or read the recent Walter Isaacson book. That does not sound like a play nice culture. It sounds pretty aggressive and harsh. So we'll see how the pendulum swings. We very much believe that, you know, to have like creative, smart individuals do their best work, they need some degree of psychological safety.
Yes.
We need high performance, you know, we have high expectations, but it's hard to be creative when you're in this.
I think one of the ways I have done it at Atlassian is using an Atlassian value called seek to understand first. So as a new leader coming in, obviously, as I looked at things, there were many changes I wanted to do, but one of the first things I did was a listening tour. So I literally went to every office in Atlassian, talked to a lot of engineers on the ground. My heart and soul is as an engineer. So I believe in listening to engineers on the ground, understand their problems, and then go from there to figure out, you know, how do you bring about some of the changes that you want to do. And so we've done a lot of changes. I would not say, you know, as dramatic as maybe what Elon did at Twitter and so on, but like good changes that we need for the company to move forward. And we've done it with a lot of listening, a lot of heart, a lot of making sure we take people along the journey. And so I think I'm in the school of thought of like, you can do big, bold things, but you can do it nicely. You can move people along on the journey.
So you've led some huge teams at certainly that I saw, the video team was enormous, right? It was like 1,000 people or something. I think 1,200 in total, I think Vijay said last time I spoke to him. As you've gone through these organizations, and I think you worked on several teams at Facebook, right? Like Marketplace was, I think, the first one you worked on, and then video.
When I left, I was the head of engineering for the Facebook app, which is about 5,000 engineers.
Was that right? Okay, I didn't realize that. Awesome. Interesting. But and each one of these like companies and even the orgs inside Facebook were quite different culturally. Like the ads org was quite different to the video org, for example.
Right. Yeah.
What are the things that you always bring to the table? I mean, you might have spoken to some already. Like, what are the non-negotiables that this is what Rajeev, his like cultural norms that are going, if you're going to hire Rajeev, this is something you're going to get in the cultural deal?
That's a great question. That's something I've reflected on quite a bit. As you spend more time as a leader and you go through different companies and cultures, you pick a few things from that, and then it also shapes, but you also have you as a person. And so it kind of comes together. So I've spent some time reflecting on it, and I'd say there's a few things that pop out for me. One of the biggest things that reflects me as a leader is what I call get done. I like to execute, get things done. Talk is cheap, action is louder than words. When all is said and done, more is said than done. So I like, maybe even as an engineer, like I would love getting in the code, fixing a bug, moving things forward, right? So I think I don't like big 5-year, 3-year plans and those kinds of things. I like to break it down into things that can be achieved, because I've seen big projects fail.
No wonder you and VJ got on.
Right.
I mean,
exactly.
Very aligned on that.
That's right. So move along. Let's figure out what we can do today, tomorrow. Like, let's not procrastinate and that sort of thing, right? So that's one value. The second is sort of this notion of mastery or world-class engineering or excellence, right? You got to be the best at what you do. And one of the books I read one of my favorite books is Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell.
Love it.
And he talks about how you need to do like 10,000 hours in a field to get to world class. And so that's something I think that's really stuck with me, is like, whether it's whatever aspect of engineering, whether it's people or, engineering excellence or architecture or scale or security, like figure out what it takes to be 10x, 100x of what you're doing, and what does that take, and what does it take to be world class. So really mastery of the craft is, and I've always been an engineer, I've never done any other role. And so for me, world class engineering is a really important thing that I strive to do myself as well as for the team I lead. So that's the second one. Third one is just, this is more of a, characteristic is having hope, having positivity, having optimism. One of the things I feel is people and teams don't even realize how much more they can do than what they thought. And I found that when you push people, you push teams, they can do amazing things. And sometimes you just have to take a crazy bet. And you can only do that if you're super positive and you have optimism. Sometimes they'll pan out, sometimes they won't, that's fine. But having positivity and having the glass half full is sort of a characteristic that's with me, and that's helped me, do things that I even didn't think was possible. So that's the third one. A couple of others, I don't like drama, so I'm a low drama person. I think in organizations where there's a lot of it's good to have interesting characters, but when you have a lot of drama, that just leads to a lot of noise and such. So it's like I'm more of a low drama, get done kind of a person. And then it's important to be principled. Lots of times people will be like, what are the principles? Okay, great. It's important to be principled, but pragmatic at the same time. So, one of the leaders at Microsoft that I learned from, Chi Lu, he said, head in the clouds, feet on the ground, right? Think big, think broad, but get things done, with feet on the ground.
Yeah, awesome. I love it. That leads us into actually quite nicely there, because you talked about sort of pushing people harder. One of the questions I asked VJ was, famously, Microsoft, I felt when I was there, before Satya really kind of took hold, right? Was quite a top-down company. There was sort of scaffolding, you fit into your place, the VP or the CVP had a vision, and you're mostly kind of executing along the lines and choosing the numbers and the spacing, And then you go to somewhere like Facebook, which is really quite bottoms up, like almost wildly so. It was a shock to me when I arrived there, and as a PM, as I was at the time, and people are like, well, you've got all these resources, what are you going to do with them? How are you going to earn the right to keep those people? You're like, what? Like, I have to invent the vision here? So very bottoms up, but obviously a thing you have to think about is, when do you get top down? And I asked VJ this question, like, when do you insert yourself into the process? And this is where he said, Rajeev, do you know Rajeev? And I was like, of course I know Rajeev. And he said, you have this sort of legendary framework he refers to, and I think he called it systems, tools, processes, and people, or something along those lines. So do you know what he's referring to? So tell us about this, and how do you think about sort of inserting yourself in I'm guessing Atlassian is more of a bottoms-up culture than a top-down one, is that fair?
Atlassian is I'd say closer to Facebook in that regard, in terms of values, culture, bottoms-up. But there's a good amount of top-down as well, obviously in a founder-led company and so on. So it's a good balance, I think, actually, between top down and bottoms up. But there's a very strong, healthy bottoms up force, which I think is always an important thing, because I think the best ideas come from, people and teams at the ground level working on things day to day.
100%.
But yeah, as a leader, when you're driving things, you have to be conscious about how you insert yourself. So I have, I'd say, 3 different, tricks or strategies or hacks, if you will, to do things. One of it is, and this came out from a discussion with some friends in Microsoft, is it's sort of like I call it the Tylenol formula, which is basically what is the level of headache? If you have a SEV 0 or a SEV 1 and it's really a big thing, like you might prescribe, multiple Tylenols a day, and some other headaches, it might be 2 a week, right? So I look at things that come to me in terms of the level of headache, and then decide, okay, do I insert myself with this group of people once a day in a daily stand-up, or do I do it once a week, or do I do it once a month? And so based on either something that is short-term fire, or it's something strategic, I pick a set of things where I feel like it's important for me to be there, either to help the team, because I come from a point of view of servant leadership, is how can I help the team, or it's important enough for the company that it's important for me to bring other resources to bear on the problem. And so I just always have a set of things that I keep close to me as a leader, and I sort of insert myself at different frequencies into groups of people who are working on particular problems. And so when I do that, though, I also use that as an opportunity to go deep, because I do think that it's important for leaders, someone like myself, a CTO, to not be like floating in the clouds, but to like actually get on the ground, understand the code and architecture or the direction. Because
so you're still reading code. You go in and you look at lines of code and have an opinion about it. Okay.
Especially if I'm at a SEV, I'm very keen to understand exactly how it works, what the code looks like, and that sort of thing. That's just the engineer in me. Like I feel like when I was an IC engineer, I used to be a little, if I get like high level questions from leaders and such, then they clearly don't understand the issues on the ground. That was something that was a flag for me. So I always swore that if I got to a leadership position, I don't want to just be the leader in the room asking some high level questions. It's like I need to understand it at a level of depth so that I can engage, in a meaningful way with my teams and with my engineers. And that's something I think that builds credibility for you as a leader, to be connected with the ground level truth really well. So yes, that's how I insert myself, but then I also make sure to be meaningful in terms of understanding what's going on the ground with those issues. So that's one tactic. The other one is you have to decide whether you manage through a process or whether you manage through people. So in some cases, it'll be like I've hired someone to do it, or I have someone on my team who I trust. I know that they have done this problem before. I know that they are world-class at what they're doing. So I just make sure to keep in touch with that person or that leader or that IC. And I know that they're going to take care of it. And, I might do some coaching on the sidelines, but I'm not in those meetings. I'm just doing it through people. In cases where I don't have a leader, or it's a new area, there isn't an obvious person I can manage through, I set up a process. And that's the process I talked about, which is it could be a daily stand-up, it could be a weekly, it could be a monthly.
Got it.
And I stay in it. And then sometimes I'll go through this for a month or two, and I'll be like, hey, that person actually is the best person to run it. So I'm going to go back to manage through people and have that person be the one on the ground.
Got it.
So all of this comes into the overarching philosophy that I call conduction, convection, radiation. And it's a physics thing. It's like when you have, Atlassian, I have about 6,000 plus engineers, reporting into me through the organization. It's easy to, as a leader, say, I'm only going to manage through my directs or through my skips. But that's not really true. You have to find a way to touch everybody in the org in some fashion. It could be directly through conduction. You meet somebody one-on-one or skip one-on-one, or that's it. That's what I call conduction.
Got it. Or there's actual touch point between the physical.
It goes back to a physics teacher who comes in and teaches the concepts and comes with a bowl of apples, and he's like, Josh, I'll give you an apple. That's conduction. I'll be like, Josh, I'll give you the apple. You give it to Vijay. That's convection. Or you just throw apples around and people catch it, and that's radiation. Right? So
I love it.
So directly touch, and then convection is you manage through people. It's like, yes, you're not directly working with a group of people, but you're working through someone. So that's convection. It's a second level indirection. And then radiation is just, you have to be cognizant of how your message is coming across to the whole org, town halls, blog posts, how you communicate different changes that you're doing, going up and doing intentional togetherness. Like when I go up to, say, Sydney, I would go and do a happy hour and meet a lot of people, socially. So you have to find ways for people to access you. You have to be accessible as a leader and grounded as a leader. And if you do that, then the words that you say and the changes that you make carry that much more credibility with the organization.
Awesome. I love the conduction, convection, radiation, and physics degree. So really, it's just great. Like, it very much describes the three ways in a nice analogy.
And I learned that from a leader at Microsoft that I worked for that I highly respect. So
that's awesome. Back to culture for a second. Then, if you're when you're leading a large team through conduction, convection, you've described some of these mechanisms for like getting to meet people and have empathy for them, but if you want to push a particular change, like let's imagine, and this is hypothetical, you join Atlassian and you don't feel like they move fast enough. You're this kind of like getting done kind of person, or you want them to be more customer centric. Sounds like that isn't a problem given the first value you keep saying. What are the tools you deploy to make cultural change in a place where there's some gap? You think I want to go from A to B. What are the things you can do to affect that?
Yeah. So I think one of the most important things is to build a vision for where you're taking the organization, because it's easy to go make different changes. And I have a whole bunch of, tools in my toolkit to go and, do those changes. But it's important to explain the why behind it, because I think if you get people anchored on why are we doing this, then they get a lot more, excited about making those changes that you want to go do, right? So at Atlassian, the mission we have put the team on is we call it world-class engineering. Atlassian is a great company, good mid-size, doing well, but like we want to be one of the top tech companies. That's the company aspiration. Okay, to be a top tech company in the same league as some of the big names that you have today, you got to have a world-class engineering team. So that's the goal. So once people understand the reason and the vision, then you can break that down into, okay, what does that mean in terms of what you want to do? And I have broken that down into kind of like 3 buckets. Number one is we're here for customers. Let's not forget, like no matter what we want to do. And so what does that mean for customers and how do you go and do that? For example, in the customer bucket, a thing that I spend a lot of time on is SEVs and incidents. That's the best time that you learn about the fragility of your systems, you learn about how customers get impacted. And so one of the toolkits I use is to make sure that all engineers, all leaders are very connected in with what's happening with SEVs. And this is one of the things that I did at Atlassian was I got my leadership team and the next level really engaged. Anytime there was a SEV 1 or a SEV 0 or something impacting customers, I made sure this was a change that we did to make sure that people are much more engaged on these incidents, right? Including myself, and seeing me model it helped.
If Rajeev is showing up, I better not skip this one.
I'm on the Zoom for the heart and things like that, right? And so that's one example. The second is people. Like you need world-class people, right? So there are 2 tools that you have for that. One is the performance management system, which you and I know from at Facebook was pretty amazing, and it really drove the right incentives. So it's engineers are pretty simple people. Like if you put the right incentives, you have a merit-based culture, and people trust the outcomes of the performance management system. They know that the work that they are doing is getting rewarded in certain ways. That's very powerful. So that's one of the things I've done at Atlassian is to go and push on the performance management system and make sure that it's aligned in a way that gets engineers to understand how they get reward things like engineering excellence, better engineering, etc. And so those things are built in, and those incentives are important. And the second one is the interview process. It's really important to make sure that you set a high bar for people coming in. And like take Microsoft as an example. In the 90s, it was a big deal to get hired by Microsoft. There was a really good process. Somewhere along the line, that kind of changed, and that resulted in some negative effects in terms of like the bar going down and so on. And then in Facebook, I think we were very, very sort of conscious about the interview process, and it was something everybody invested in to make sure that you set a high bar for people coming in. So that's the second area. And then the third is like, what do you do for world-class engineering? So one of the things that we are doing is developer productivity. It's like figuring out what makes your developers productive, what comes in the way in terms of friction, what's preventing developers from having joy. We actually call it developer joy, which is, it's not, productivity sounds like a business thing. It's like, oh, we want to get people more productive for business reasons. But the real goal is developer joy. And I go back to my roots as an engineer. When was the time I had the most fun writing code, building things? Because that's what we joined to be engineers who write code and build amazing things that change the world. And if you think about the things that gave you joy when you were writing code and the things that gave you friction when you were writing code, and you make sure that for every engineer on the team, you take care of those things, that's what gets people to be joyful coming in and to be excited waking up in the morning to go write more code and things like that. And that then leads to productivity. But I think what we have done at Atlassian is to say, look, no, the bigger goal is developer joy. And let's look at all the things that come in the way of joy. What are the things that enhance joy? How do you get into the flow of creation? Because writing code is still more art than science. I mean, there's a lot of science, obviously, with tech and so on, but there's a lot of art to it.
For sure.
And having the joy is an important thing. And if you have that, productivity will follow.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just focus on the productivity metrics without thinking about joy, then you kind of don't have the full solution.
Yeah, that makes sense. So many. One of the things I'm seeing is this was true in the conversation with the VJ as well, is how we keep coming back to the same ideas and same threads in every single answer. And I think that's one of the key things to culture, is there's no getting away from it. Like the cultural ideas are intertwined into the fabric of everything you do. So the fact that you try and deliver developer joy to the customers of Atlassian's product, but also that's something you try and do internally. My favorite example of that you've given is actually the fact that your stock ticker price is team.
Yes.
I mean, like, what better signaling of what you care about as an organization, both the team inside Atlassian, the team inside the customers that you're serving and making them more productive. I think it's awesome. I think that's very inspiring. Wow, we got through a lot here. I think we've done all of my questions here. So my last question is, a super connected person. Who should be my next guest to come and talk about engineering culture? And what should be the main question I should ask them?
So I think that one person is a good friend and somebody I admire and respect a lot is Vivek Sharma.
Okay.
And Vivek and I were at Microsoft together. We built Office 365 together, taking it to the cloud. And then we were together on Facebook as well on Marketplace and things like that. And he's a good close friend and somebody who is very inspirational and also a student of culture, somebody who is very cognizant of the kind of culture one should set. He's a PM, he's a product leader, but interesting fun fact is he and I both got sort of promoted to distinguished engineer at the same time in Microsoft. Okay. He was the PM lead, I was the eng lead, but we were both recognized as distinguished engineers.
It's unusual for a PM.
It's unusual for a PM. But Vivek is very technical and he would be right in the code there with my engineers and we both got along really well. And I think it's one of the things in tech is having a PM-EM relationship really thrive. Really helps build amazing teams. And I've had the good fortune of having many PM leaders over time, and Vivek is definitely up there as someone, I think who would be very interesting to talk to.
Awesome. Well, I know him a little bit as well. Not super well. We never actually worked together. So we almost did. But so Vivek, you saw it here. We got to get you into the studio for an interview. What should I ask him?
You should ask him about what does it take to achieve impossible things. If there's one person who can achieve impossible things, with an ordinary set of people, it's Vivek. I mean, he inspires ordinary people to do extraordinary things, and I think you should definitely ask him about that.
Okay, no, that's a great question. What a whole episode, how to achieve the impossible. I think he's at Stripe now, right? Actually, we just missed each other. Yeah, I think so. So that's awesome. So I'll reach out. Rajeev, thank you for doing this. That was great. I think there's so much great content there. We're going to struggle to pick a title. Thank you for traveling over and spending the time with me. And being live here in Studio Z. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Josh. Thank you all for listening to me. I really enjoyed it and we should do it again.
Definitely. Cheers.